and George will be leading us in the pledge. So if we could all stand.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you. We know, Lord, that you are the sovereign King of this universe. We thank you, Lord, that you ordain everything that happens. Father, we thank you that we can trust you with our lives, with our times, with everything we have. Pray this morning that you would open our ears, give us ears to hear, Lord. This is an important message. Father, we pray that you would glorify yourself in this organization, that you would be with us, Lord, as we seek to reestablish biblical foundations in our government. We thank you for these things, Lord, in Jesus' name.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I am excited about Kevin Crowe being here today, and he's well known, I think, to all of us. He does more than teach, but as a professor, but he also travels around here and there to the States speaking to groups who are interested in our biblical foundations. One of the things that really strikes me about America today is we have many who are conservatives, many who even love the Constitution, but we've lost the spirit of our founders. And Dan Fisher always says in his presentation on the Black Robe Regiment that one of the famous things that were said frequently during the war for independence was that we have no king but King Jesus. The heart and soul of that statement is missing today in politics. And those who make a lasting difference in world history are those who have bowed the knees to the Lord Jesus Christ. And his kingdom is what we're going to wind up with. So it's time that we get on board and say that again. We have no king but King Jesus as our lead political commentary. And for those reasons, I'm happy to have Kevin Crowe here today. Again, he's scored highly as a professor as being exciting, visionary, inspiring, and I think we're going to enjoy him today. And Kevin, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming, so feel free to grab that mic out of there anytime you feel like walking around. And let's give Kevin an OCPAC round.
Thank you. One of the qualities that distinguishes many contemporary American conservatives from their more liberal-minded colleagues is their faith that the surest guarantors of our liberty are the institutional checks and balances that our founding fathers wisely built into our Constitution and our free market economic system that has allowed Americans to pursue happiness since the country's founding. And while these two factors have certainly played a role in securing our political and economic freedoms, they alone have never been sufficient in guaranteeing true liberty. And this is a fact recognized by our founding fathers. For example, Samuel Adams once noted, "Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. He, therefore, is the truest friend of the liberty of his country who tries to promote its virtue." In his farewell address, George Washington noted, "Virtue and morality is a necessary spring of popular government." And in a letter that he wrote to Lafayette in 1788, Washington observed, "Human rights can only be assured among a virtuous people." James Madison, the father of the Constitution, noted, to suppose that any form of government will secure liberty and happiness without any virtue in the people is chimerical. What he means is imaginary, like a chimerical idea. And even the great deist skeptic Benjamin Franklin recognized only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. Now, that our founding fathers understood the necessary role that virtue plays in preserving human liberty and the well-being of any society comes as no surprise. These men were well-versed in the Western political tradition. Baron de Montesquieu, who, by the way, he's the political theorist most often cited by the framers of our Constitution, noted that the deterioration of a government begins almost always by the decay of its principles. Sadly, an increasing number of Americans across the political spectrum, and especially those of the so-called political class, have little knowledge of our Western political tradition and therefore don't grasp fully the principles upon which it is based. Now let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. We conservatives pride ourselves on understanding the true purpose of government. So what will we say as conservatives is the true purpose of government? Or what is most often said by conservatives? Freedom. Small government. You usually hear the notion to secure our liberty, right? You often hear that that's the main purpose of government is to secure our liberty. And I'm not denying that. But the question is, what is liberty? Now we define that. We define that in our, we define that really well with three things we always say. And we define liberty as what? Or not liberty, but our purpose of government is, that's it. But we say we want the notion of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? This is what our central core is. And when we look at those, we look at that last one and we talk about pursuit of happiness. What does that mean? And it's clear what word was originally there. I mean, if you go back, what Jefferson substituted, originally it was life, liberty, and property, right? Now, the thing is this. What has happened among modern libertarians, many modern conservatives is when we say life, liberty, and property, we associate property with an ends, just like life and liberty are an ends. But if you actually look at the reason that it was life, liberty, and property, the notion was property basically afforded us a certain amount of independence so we could exercise our liberty. What has happened in the modern conservative movement and among libertarians is we've changed property from a means of securing our liberty to actually an ends. That is, we have liberty to acquire more and more and more property. I'm not denying that you can't acquire more and more property, but we make it an ends. Well, the fact is, if it becomes an ends, that itself is a vice. I mean, that's just greed. Again, I'm not saying outlaw. What I'm saying is, if it becomes an end, that's greed.
Amen.
And by the way, I will mention this. I'm a conservative. I'm a proud conservative. But I also understand liberal critics of modern conservatives. And one of the liberal critics is, well, they're obsessed with money. And the fact is, a lot of times that is true. If we make property an ends, not a means. Because the reason we have property is so that we are not beholden too much to other people. We need enough self-autonomy so that we can exercise our reason, so that we can make good choices, so we aren't beholden to people. Now this is interesting because this is ironic, but we always think of conservatives here, liberals here, libertarians in the middle. But I would almost say it's almost like a triangle. And what I mean by that is this. There are actually concerns that liberals have, surprisingly, that are similar to concerns that conservatives have. And both of them, for example, are worried about things like debt. Okay? For conservatives, we fear this and we fear the intrusion of big government. Rightly so. Okay, this is not a defense of big government. There is something to be frightened about that. Liberals, they fear debt too, but for them they see it as big business. They see, interest rates going too high, things of this nature. And so a lot of times when you see liberals give you an example. This is a misplaced reaction, but nevertheless, you need to understand why they have this reaction. If you see a lot of young people who are drawn to socialism, again, this is not a defense of socialism. The notion is a lot of these people are strapped by debt, whether it's for student loans or whatever. And so they fear losing their autonomy. Remember, the fear of debt was actually one thing that motivated some of our own founding fathers to finally say, enough, we need our independence. So what I'm saying is, oftentimes liberals and conservatives do have the same, but it's who they see as the particular boogeyman. And I would like to mention that they're not always wrong in this respect. Let me give you an example, just a personal example, how we can be trapped between two forces. A few years back, we had, of course, when we had Obamacare, and the insurance law changed. Okay, that wiped out our family. I mean, just wiped us out because one of the provisions of the law was, well, if your employer offers you insurance, you have to take it. Now, it didn't say, well, are they going to supply insurance if it's offered? Well, my employer offered it, but the cost was way beyond what we could have paid. So being caught off guard, we ended up taking about $20,000 in credit card debt. Never had credit card debt before there. Now, if you look at that, that was a threat from big government, but if you actually look who benefited from it, a lot of insurance companies and big business. So we ended up having to take debt. The other way we paid that is I used to have a Roth IRA, and you know how a Roth IRA works. You put you pay the taxes and then put it in. Now in a Roth IRA, you can withdraw your contributions at any time. You can't withdraw without penalty because you've already paid it. So we ended up withdrawing again about $20,000. And so when we did that, last year we received a tax bill wanting $8,000 in taxes. And I said, no, that's a Roth IRA, okay? I don't have to pay this. We fought the IRS for a year. 3 different times they said, oh, you're okay, and then another office would hit us up. Now, by the same token, we would try to get in touch with TIAA saying, look, this was a Roth IRA, you need to show this. And it was like pulling teeth getting to release the right documents. Luckily for us, after fighting them for a year, we found an IRS person who understood, yeah, we were right, they gave us a letter, and we had a TIAA person who finally sent us the right stuff. But notice, the problem there was an overarching bureaucracy, both from big government on the one hand and big business on the other hand. So if you see that, there is points liberals have. Big government and big business, neither one of them is superior to the other. Both of them are distant, and you have very little accountability. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that out that you know, some of these people have these points. Let me go back to this. Another example of how moderns how moderns again don't necessarily understand what's important. In other words, how we miss virtue is think about how moderns distinguish between good governments and bad. And when I say moderns, I'm talking about conservatives, and I'm talking about liberals, and I'm talking about libertarians. And a lot of times what moderns do is they say, well, it's simple. What distinguishes a good government from a bad government is simply how many people get to voice their opinion, right? Good government is democracy, bad government is dictatorship. Now this is an argument that would be made by Clinton, Bush, Obama, Bush, Clinton, okay, sorry. Woodrow Wilson, make the world safe for democracy. But if that is the simple truth, if that's all that distinguishes good government from bad government, then we also have to admit, for example, that the Hutus slaughtering Tutsis in Rwanda was a just act, because that was a majority opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the Hutus getting their machetes out and exercising democracy. Okay? As we know, that was not a just act. By the same token, we would have to assume that the royal family of Thailand must be monsters. They're a royal family. Despite the fact that, they kept Thailand from being never colonized, they avoided the devastation of World War II, they survived the Cold War, Thailand remained, was never taken over by the communists, and to this day, if you go to virtually any Thai restaurant, do this, go to eat at a Thai restaurant this weekend, anytime you go to a Thai restaurant, there's always a picture of the king, which shows you that they have at least some endearment towards the royal family. Now again, I'm not saying monarchy is better than democracy. What I'm saying is, if we base good government from bad government just on how many people get to speak, that doesn't work. Now, so how did people in the Western tradition traditionally distinguish between various forms of government, good governments and bad government? Well, basically they use two ways. First of all, they would do like we did, how many people get to make the decision. But then they took a second category, and that is, in whose interest are the people making the decision, making that decision? In other words, who's going to be impacted by their decisions? Okay? To what ends? There we go. To what ends is the government? And this is a problem that we have when it comes to modern politics. While we may be able to distinguish between various regimes when it comes down to how many people get to call the shots, we forget the important consideration: to what end? That is, are the goals virtuous? Are the decision makers? And by the way, when I say decision makers, I don't just mean the elected officials. I also mean those of us who elect the officials. Are we reasonable people governed by virtue, or are these people slaves to their own base appetites? That's an important consideration. This is a question that we rarely ask anymore. But if we truly care for liberty, then we better start considering that question. Now, before I go any further, let me assure you I am not a monarchist, okay? I am a Republican, and I'm a Republican more with a little r than I am a big R. I believe in republics. Now that said, our Republican institutions, our Constitution, and particularly our Bill of Rights, as well as our Declaration of Independence, our very notions of liberty and good governance have roots that can be traced back to a time when monarchical forms of government were the norm. Okay? I just finished, for example, we just ended our semester, and I had a class this semester on the history of France and England, basically from the Middle Ages to about 1789. And in that class, we examined in great detail, we always go back to the original works, the roots of our constitutional principles as spelled out not only in our Constitution and its Declaration of Independence, but basically its predecessors. We examined, for example, the English Declaration of Rights in 1689. We examined French Calvinist tracts during the Wars of Religion, the Vindicii contra Tyrannos. We looked at, for example, the writers of the Catholic political theorist Jean Boucher. But we actually began the class by looking at the work that I just passed out to you guys, a little piece of some of the political ideas of the medieval theorist John of Salisbury. He wrote during the 12th century. And what I want to do today is I want to look at his works to see what it can still tell, how it resonates even to this day. Now, true, the section that I gave you, he monarchy. Having said this, in his complete works, he deals with other forms of government as well. The reason I took the section that deals with monarchy, it's the easiest to understand. Okay, and so what can we gather from this text that we can apply towards our Republican institutions? Well, I'm going to look at three things. First of all, I want to look at what does it mean to be a good magistrate. Now, he's going to talk about a prince, okay, obviously a monarch. But you can apply this same standard to our elected officials. What does it mean? What type of individual are you looking for? Okay, and that has not changed, by the way. That doesn't matter whether we're talking about a king, or whether you're talking about a president, or whether you're talking about a congressman, or whether you're talking about a mayor. That standard is pretty fixed. And so we want to look at that. The second thing is I want to look at what is liberty. Because we think we know what liberty is, but we're going to actually talk about what liberty really is. Okay? And then the third thing is I want to talk about what is the connection between liberty and virtue. So let me, if you'll pull, excuse me. Find this. There we go. So if we look at this, and I'll start right off the bat, this is at the very beginning of this, on yours I think it's the page 57, he starts off by talking about the difference between a tyrant and a prince, and this is interesting. As I said, in kind of the pre-modern world, they not only distinguish governments by who gets to call the shots, but to what end. And so there are always good forms and bad forms. So for example, there was a monarchy, but then there was a tyrant, a tyranny, okay? In both cases, one person called the shots, but what separated is to what ends. There was also what they called an aristocracy, which is a few people call the shots. And there was an oligarchy, which is also a few people call the shots. And then they had what was called a polity, which is the majority call the shots, which was opposed to a democracy, which is also a majority that called the shots. So what's the difference then, for example, between an aristocracy and an oligarchy? The difference is to what end. In an aristocracy, the few people who are making the decisions ask themselves, is this the right decision? Is this going to be best for everybody? Notice I didn't say for the people, but literally for people on an individual basis. Is this going to make them better people? Whereas in an oligarchy, the only thing those people in charge are interested in, how does it benefit me? Me. Do I get what I want? Okay? In a polity, again, it's the majority of people, but the notion is this good for people? Is this good for us? Is it good for our neighbors? Does it make us better people? In a democracy, the way they would define that is, again, majority's in charge, but the only concern is, can we satisfy our appetites? Do we get free stuff? Does that make sense? So again, they distinguish between good forms and bad forms. Now what he's looking at again is these two forms of monarchy, a prince and a tyrant. So he starts off, he looks at this, he says, between a tyrant and a prince, there is this single or chief difference, that the latter obeys the laws and rules the people by its dictates, accounting himself as but their servant. It is by virtue of the law that he makes good his claim to the foremost and chief place in the management of the affairs of the commonwealth, and in the bearing of the burdens. And his elevation over others consists in this, that whereas private men are held responsible only for their private affairs, on the prince falls the burdens of the whole community. And that's key. You can still use that even for modern day elected officials. The notion is, when you have that political power, your concern must be what is best, not what am I going to get out of this. And that's where he even talks about this. If you think about this, if you think about kings or queens, if you think about Queen Elizabeth right now, if she gets upset, she always says, we are displeased. Well, she doesn't say schizophrenic. She says that because she represents all of the British people, okay? And she cannot have a will of her own. Her will must be what is best for Britain. Again, when we elect an official, they can't have their own appetites. It's not, what am I going to get out of this? Think about this. How many elected officials go in moderately wealthy and come out loaded? Think about this. If you actually want real reform, we ought to really watch what people do after they're out of office.
Yeah.
We have these laws against bribery, but it doesn't stop people from getting paid off after the fact. I don't mean like they're going to get the bribe, but they may get, consulting fees, speaking fees, things of this nature. No, when you go in, you deny yourself. And we can look at this. George Washington lived according to this. George Washington had this notion of the disinterested man, not the uninterested, the disinterested. That is, he doesn't look at how it impacts him. He's disinterested. He's distant. It's, what is my duty? Does this make sense? Ask yourselves that. How many people follow that? Now, I'm going to skip down. This is towards the bottom. Don't worry about this. But he also has this. He says, the power which the prince has is therefore from God. For the power of God is never lost, never severed from him, but he merely exercises it through his subordinate hand, making all things teach his mercy or justice. Now, here's the thing that we forget. In modernity, we assume that we can just agree on a box. Let me explain what I mean by a box. Every society has to have a box that we function in, that we all agree this is the boundaries. This is what's right, this is what's wrong, okay? One of the things that we teach in university, we have classes on logic, Okay, but here's the thing. Logic itself has no meaning unless we agree with the boundaries of the box. You have to agree with absolutes. Now, during the so-called scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, you had people like Descartes that thought, well, you could just draw a box. You know, I think, therefore I am. Let's start there. We can all agree with that. Well, maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm just a brain fart in the mind of God, okay? So you can't even say that I think, therefore I am. There has to be something greater than that, absolute. And in the Western tradition, the notion of absolute was God. Okay? Here's the box. Here are the rules. Now we can reason within that box. Once we think that there doesn't exist a box, or we can just make stuff up, then you can see already where we're going now in this country. That there are no absolutes. There has to be absolutes. Now I want to stress this. Maybe one set of absolutes may work here and one set of absolutes here, but there has to be absolutes. Does this make sense? By the way, some absolutes are absolute, okay? And so this is always a danger when we say there are no absolutes. Now, to show you this, to show you our founding fathers understood this, at what moment does an American president become an American president? When did Trump become president? When? Why? When? What moment does he become president? What moment did George Washington become president? What moment did Barack Obama become president? What moment does Ronald Reagan become president? When they do what? When they take an oath. And when they take an oath, what do? What else? They got one hand raised. What do they have that other hand on? That's it. The notion is we acknowledge that there is some type of absolutes. Something above our own reason. Does this make sense? Okay. All right, let's keep going. Sorry about that. Let's see. Get off task sometimes. Let's look at it. Watching the time. Let's look at another thing here. I want to talk about this and see if this isn't a good rule that even our own elected officials can follow. This is going to be on your guys' page 59. Go up 9 lines from the bottom. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the line that starts members of the body. You see that? Page 59. Okay, I'm going to start where it says now, because he's going to talk about what. Remember, he's talking about a prince, a king. But remember, you can add this to our own elected officials. He says, this is what it is for a prince. He says, now he performs his ministry faithfully when he is mind's true status and remembers that he bears the person of the Universalis, the Universalis, basically all the people, okay, of those subject to him. And when he is fully conscious that he owes his life not to himself and his own private ends, but to others, and allows it to them accordingly, and duly ordered charity and affection. Now here it is. Here's the order he has to follow. Therefore, he owes the whole of himself to God. I have to ask you, what is God? Did you ever think about that question?
Is this a trick question?
No, what is God? Not his creator, but what else? What is God? There's other things. Justice. Can you not associate the two? Justice, mercy, all of this. I mean, that's the definition. How can you conceive of justice without God? Okay. So the king, or we could apply this to any elected official, you could say the president, right? You have to owe your total of yourself to God. What that means is you cannot act outside of justice. That's the one thing you can't do. Okay, so that's totally. Okay, next thing. The whole of himself to God. Most of himself to his country. Now think about that. He says most of himself. Notice he didn't say all of himself. When would he not owe himself to his country? If what? If his country does what?
Rebels against God.
That's it. If it's outside of justice. So again, you owe most of yourself to your country, but I don't know. If you can't say something like, oh, I don't know, let's commit genocide against a group so we can seize their property. You can't do that, okay? That's against justice. So you owe most of yourself to your country, the benefit of your country, because again, you're king, right? You know, that's your charge, that's what's been given to you. So you have to take care of your country first unless it goes against justice. Again, apply this to a president. You're made president of the United States, your first concern, generally speaking, is your country. You know, what is best for your country? You're not a world leader, by the way. Your concern is not the rest of the world, because the world's too big. Your concern is your country. That's what's been entrusted to you. And the only time that you go against what is best for your country, because it's really not best, is if it is against justice. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, next thing. By the way, think about that, the country. Apply this to any elected official. If you're a representative, a U.S. representative, outside of justice, what do you owe most of yourself to then? Not your state. Your constituents, because you're a representative. That's right. And the only way you would go against your constituents is if it was unjust. All right? Here's one. This is always a trick question that nobody gets. And in fact, the people who have this office, if you can name two that get it, let me know. If you're a U.S. senator, what do you owe? What do you owe most of your, unless it's against justice? What do you owe yourself to? The state, not what most people think. Not the people. People forget that. The purpose of a U.S. senator is to watch out for the interests of the state. Representatives, the people. Let me ask you this. How many U.S. senators are there who understand their task? How many can you name? I don't know that I can name one. There might be one. I have one in the back of my mind, maybe, but I've got to watch them a little closer. But not anywhere. They don't understand their task. Again, one should always understand their task. So we got that. Okay, so most of themselves to their country, or whatever the notion is. Much to his relatives and friends. Now, the reason you say, well, that means he can have like nepotism. No, much to. That means you've got to be a family man. That means you need to be personal. You're not just by yourself. Does that make sense? Again, you cannot benefit them at the expense of, in this case, your country, if you're a representative, your constituency, the Senate, the state. Does that make sense? But much. You need to be a family man and all that. Very little to foreigners, but still somewhat. Now that's interesting. Again, we're not world leaders. Your job is whatever you're set there to do. If you're a king, it's the country. If you're a duke, it's the dukedom. If you're a senator, it's your state. If you're a representative, it's your constituency. Not foreigners. He said very little, but still somewhat. When would there be somewhat? You can't abuse people. Does that make sense? So again, we have a tourist in this country and they get in a car accident. Sorry guys, we may end up having to pay for that. That's just being a good host. Does that make sense? That doesn't mean that we owe, like, letting everybody come over and use our healthcare system. That's not what that means. But if there is an accident, maybe we have to do this. Does that make sense? Again, it doesn't mean come over, have your kid, and we can benefit for the rest of their life. That's not what that means. But it does mean if there's an accident or something like that. You can't say, well, they're foreign, let them die. We can't do that. They're still guests. We would do the same. If you were in Britain right now and had a heart attack, the bill would go to their healthcare system. But you can't go over and move to Britain and then pick up their benefits. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, we can't just say, no, wash our hands. We have a certain amount. What's decent? But that's it. Okay. All right, so much for that. Now I want to go to the second part of this, which is where, let's see, excuse me, I really stapled this wrong, didn't I? Let's see, okay. I want to go to that section on liberty and tyranny, because now he's going to define what liberty is here, okay? You see this part on page 60? He says, liberty means judging everything freely in accordance with one's individual judgment, and does not hesitate to reprove what it sees opposed to good morals. Now this is important, what liberty actually is. I teach at a liberal arts college. People say, liberal arts college, what is it, a bunch of liberals? No. Let me see where the word actually comes from. It comes from the artes liberales, okay, the liberal arts, which was originally the notion of studies appropriate to a free people. And what studies was that? Basically, it was the ability to distinguish between good and bad. That was the whole purpose of education initially. And I know people think, no, the purpose of education is to train people for jobs. That's training. That's not an education. An education is learning to distinguish between good and bad. By the way, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson once said this. He says, no government can continue good but under the control of the people. And their minds are to be informed by education what is right and what is wrong. To be encouraged in habits of virtue and to be deterred from that of vice. I'll give you a couple of words here. There was a word the Greeks had called ethos, and it means a habit. That's all it is. Ethos, habit. So where we get the word ethics from, you train people good habits, and that's how they'll act. It's like you want to be a good basketball player and make them shots all the time. What do? You go practice all the time, until it becomes a second nature. That's what you're supposed to instill in people. The Greeks didn't have a word for education. The word they had was paideia. And paideia literally meant the making of a man. The making of someone who's not only can have a job, but somebody who's a good citizen, somebody who's a good father. That's the purpose of education. You see, what we've done in the modern world is we've confused liberty with the more choices you have, the more liberty you have. That's not true. Liberty is the ability to choose wisely. Think about it now. You get on that internet, you got more choices than you've ever had. Are you free? Let me use an example. We'll use a materialist example. Let's say you want to buy a car, okay? I'll give you two choices. One guy can go buy a car and he gets 500 models of cars to choose from, but he doesn't know anything about a car. The other one gets 15 models of car to choose from, but he knows every car. Which one actually has more liberty? The second one
that knows more.
Because the first one is a slave to the car dealer. That's what true liberty is. Jefferson understood this. John of Salisbury understood this. And by the way, the Romans had this other word they had called occultus. Okay? It's where we get it means to care for. It's where we get the word culture from. It's a caring for, a tending to. That's how you build good ethics. People say, well, we need to stay away from the culture war. The culture war is the only war worth fighting a lot of times. What type of society are you going to produce? Can people distinguish between what's right and wrong? Goes on, he says, nothing but virtue is more splendid than liberty. If indeed liberty can ever properly be severed from virtue. For all right-thinking men, it is clear that true liberty issues from no other source. Wherefore, since all agree that virtue is the highest good in life, and that it alone can strike off the heavy and hateful yoke of slavery, it has been the opinion of philosophers that men should die if the need arose for the sake of virtue, which is the only reason for living. But virtue can never be fully obtained without liberty. And the absence of liberty proves that virtue in its full perfection is wanting. Therefore, a man is free in proportion to the measure of his virtue. This is key. And the extent to which he is free determines what his virtues can accomplish. That's why that right of property is important. So you can exercise. He goes on. He says, well, on the other hand, it is vices alone which bring about slavery and subject a man and persons to unmeet obedience. And though slavery of a person may seem at times the more to be pitied, in reality, slavery to vices is ever far more wretched. What does he mean by that? Think about this. Let's say we went to war against the Russians and they beat us. Let's just say that. All of a sudden the Russians haul us off to the gulags and we're all working and everything. What do we still have? What do we still have? Solzhenitsyn still had that. What do you still have?
Liberty.
Yes, you can still distinguish. You've still got this ability. They have not taken away your freedom. True slavery becomes, he says, a slave to vice. Now I ask you this. Think about any vice. It can be any vice. It can be drugs. You guys, anybody know people that are hooked to drugs? Are they free? No. They are a slave. It's like being demon-possessed. You cannot decide. But it didn't have to be drugs. It can be things we forget. Greed. Stuff. This is the problem in modern politics. Let me tell you. Once upon a time, there were two ways for society to function. One way is you can just shoot people. Fear works. But that doesn't work as well as you think it does, because you have to eventually stop that. You can't kill everybody. And you can't keep everybody gunned down forever. By the way, there's other bad things too, like you kill people. But anyways, so that was one way. The other way was the idea of like-mindedness. You show that people have the same goals. They have the same virtues. They have the same ethos, the same habits. And therefore, they try to work together. Now, what happened was, in the modern world, we came up with a third way. And the third way was bribery. You elect us, and we'll get you stuff. And by the way, this can be manipulated both by socialists and capitalists.
Sure does, yeah.
The question is, you do what we say, and you'll benefit materially. And both groups do this. I know a lot of liberals think, well, that's right, you preach it, man, because those Republicans out there are greedy. It's true about socialists, too. You know, if you go back to the Soviet Union, the notion was, look, you let us run the show, we'll give you decent health care and free education. Okay, maybe, you know. That's one thing that every communist revolution does. They give them those two things. By the way, that's what you see. On the other hand, we can look again at ones who totally, by the way, I'm not attacking the free market, but those who put their faith totally in the free market, but that's it, and nothing else. The notion is, again, you elect us, the economy booms, you can get more and more and more. Well, first of all, I don't know whether that's true that you can continue to get more and more and more, but let's say it was possible. Let's say you keep electing me and the economy will keep getting better and better and better. How much crap at Walmart do you have to buy before you're happy? And in fact, we know it's not true. How many of you see the show on TLC, Hoarders? Have you ever seen the show Hoarders? Are any of those people happy? No, it's a false dream. And people are willing to sacrifice their liberty for stuff. And that guys, on both sides, American liberals and American conservatives have bought into. 100% almost. That's the core of the Democrat Party. That's the core of the Republican Party. That's the core of the Libertarian Party. Material well-being. Which again, I don't even know if that's possible, but if it were, is that enough? So again, true liberty, or true slavery is a slave device. Again, can you put down the internet? Can you get off of that? Stop downloading the porn. You don't even have to be downloading porn. It could be just getting on the internet and searching continually. Can you put down the cell phone? Or is that what brings you happiness? Uncontrolled appetite. That's what vice is. Yeah, and all of us have some vice where you're controlled by it. You know, what you do is you look for people, you should look for people who help you control your vice. By the way, that's what I do. Everybody has a vice. My vice is, I'm not blaming this on my dad. My dad was a good man. He was retired military, and so I got the sense of duty from him. I also picked up his language, so okay. But you know what? I married a woman who, I have 2 little kids now, and my wife watches me, and she says, watch your mouth, because sometimes I have to. Okay? And by the way, I'm not excusing this. It's not a good thing. Don't pick it up. But the point is, I married somebody who helps me try to control that vice. And at home, I'm getting more successful. Okay, let's see. All right. One last little thing. Yeah, perfect timing. On page 61, he's going to talk about what a tyrant is, okay, and what a prince is, okay? This is on page 61, that first full paragraph where it says a tyrant. He says, a tyrant, as the philosophers have described him, is one who oppresses the people by rulership based upon force, while he who rules in accordance with the law is a prince. Law is the gift of God, the model of equity, a standard of justice, of likeness of the divine will, the guardian of well-being, a bound of union and solidarity between peoples, a rule defining duties, a barrier against the vices, and a destroyer thereof, a punishment of violence and of all wrongdoing. The law is assailed by force or by fraud. That's key, by force or by fraud. And as it were, either wrecked by the fury of the lion or undermined by the wiles of the serpent. What do I mean him by the serpent. How can you undermine the law? Now looky here, it goes on. He's going to get to that. Skip down about 3 lines. It says, the prince fights for the laws and the liberty of the people. That's what your elected officials should do. Fight for the law and the liberty of the people. The liberty of the people, virtue. Okay? Fight for the law and the liberty of the people, yeah. The tyrant thinks nothing done unless he brings the laws to naught and reduces people to slavery. Let me ask you this. Where does slavery come from again? Where does slavery come from? Vice. So how does a tyrant reduce people to slavery?
Bread and circuses.
That's it. It can be all kinds of things. Let me do this, you'll benefit materially. Just look the other way. Get you hooked. I don't have time to talk about this one. Paul's heard this one when I gave the talk on Book 8 of Plato's Republic. And one of the things that in Plato's Republic, he talks about how good forms of government go to bad forms. And the second to the last form of government is democracy. Okay? And what you have is every type of government leads to a different type. So for example, you have aristocracy, supposedly the best type of government. And that gives way to what's called a democracy, rule by honor, which gives way to an oligarchy, rule by the rich, which eventually gives way to democracy, which is ruled by the majority. But the problem is, the way a democracy comes along is somebody comes up who opposes the rich and say, you bring us to power and we'll get you stuff. We'll fight the rich, and we'll get you free stuff. And what they noted, what Plato always noted was this: the son of democracy is always tyranny. Because you're going to bring somebody who's going to get you stuff. They're going to get you those freebies. And by the way, it works both ways. You know, Democrats freebies, Republicans, yeah, we'll let you whatever. We'll give you more money, whatever. I know. Let's do something. What do they call it? Economic development. There's your Republican one. And by the way, that's the one thing I'll give liberals. Most liberals do stay away from that. That's one thing they rightly call us on. Some of them don't, but many of them do. But notice, both of them, it's what freebies you going to give me. And so, the son of democracy is the tyrant. So he goes on and he says this. He says, he says, so the tyrant, he says, brings the laws to naught and reduces the people to slavery. Hence, the prince is a kind of likeness of the divinity. The tyrant, on the contrary, is a likeness and boldness of the adversary, even of the wickedness of Lucifer. And that's the key thing. And this is something, like I said, that our founding fathers understood. Patrick Henry, he noted, a corrupt public conscience is incompatible with freedom. And then John Adams, public virtue cannot exist in a nation without private virtue. And public virtue is the only foundation of republics. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Who cannot govern themselves individually. Their appetites cannot govern a society collectively. And that's the point we need to remember. Good timing? Okay.
Excellent. Well done. Let's give them a hand. We have just a few minutes for questions. Does anybody have questions for?
And by the way, if people don't get to ask them now, I'll stay around afterwards too.
Okay. Mike Sawyer.
Yeah, you were talking about how United States senators owe their allegiance to their states.
That's right.
But from the point of the 17th Amendment on, when it became a public beauty contest, it switched their allegiance.
Let me get to that. What the 17th Amendment did was undermine our constitutional check. It did. But as I said, there's a greater check than a constitutional check, and that is virtue. When you were elected that office, you need to understand what the purpose of that office is. You need to understand this. And the thing is, that does not give you the moral check to not act like a U.S. Senator. You are immoral if you are not doing the job. Whether you call yourself a Christian or not, you're acting immoral. Again, you know, This is true of the Spartans, this is true of the Romans. For a long time, they didn't have that many laws. What they had were traditions. People act within, there wasn't, the Romans had this thing, consuls, they weren't supposed to run for re-election. There wasn't any law that said you couldn't. And for the vast majority of the history of the Republic, it wasn't until the last century or so that they started running for re-election. They checked themselves. Think of Washington. Let me tell you what Washington's greatest act was, political act, to quit. 2 terms, and he said, look, I'm going to step down. I'm going to do this in modern English instead of 18th century English. He says, I'm not doing this because I'm lazy. I'm not doing this because I'm being a bad citizen. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Because what happens is, there were people like Hamilton. I don't like Hamilton. There were people like Hamilton who wanted to make him a king. And Washington knew this was dangerous. Could Washington help maybe a 3rd term? Maybe. But he knew that people were going to look to him. And if we are looking to one person to fix everything, it's already lost. We have a slave mentality. That's what happens. Slaves look for a master. And I hate presidential campaigns when they portray it as, this is the only guy who's going to save us. Whoa. No. Washington didn't need the law. He knew what was right. Virtue is the answer. Because if you change it, if we had perfect laws, it doesn't matter. If people are unvirtuous, they'll either skirt the law or they'll change it eventually. So again, that doesn't give people a blank check not to do what's right. Not to do not only what's right, not only what is right to do, what is basically the description of the job.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me get you a mic here.
You've been talking primarily about the government and the government. Talk about the third-party influence. I'm thinking specifically of the media that deceives the people in lying to the people in ways that brings about deceptive government, that role in the government equation.
Well, again, the media in general, okay, obviously we can think of exceptions to this, but the media in general has bought into the modern lie. For example, they're the ones that, again, associate liberty with unlimited choice, not being able to make the right decisions. And so the media is almost a place you can't even start with. They have no concept of virtue. When I say they, I'm talking about dominant media majority. Does that make sense? There's always decent people in almost anything. But again, those aren't the trendsetters. So yeah, but again, that's something we can't regulate. I'm not calling for the regulation of the media. I'm saying we need to be able to distinguish, is this right or is this wrong? And you need to call out people if they're wrong. And not be afraid of it. Not be afraid. We're afraid for some reason of calling people out if they're wrong. Like, well, people will think bad of me. And I told Paul this earlier. I was talking to some of you guys, and I said, the trick is, if you don't want to get in trouble, just stay in trouble. That's what I do at home. I was always in trouble. Anyway, so that way I never get in trouble.
Sounds like Trump.
Yeah, that's right. To a degree, that's true.
I'm Jim. Would you address absolutes as free will opinion?
Say it again.
Absolutes based on free will opinion. Would you agree?
Absolutes based on free will opinion. I'm not for sure your question. I'm not exactly. What do you mean? What are the absolutes?
Each of us has our opinion.
Well, there are opinions, but remember, opinions are not necessarily based on facts. They're based on opinion. Does that make sense? So they are separate.
That's all we got.
Can you always back up the opinion? That's the notion.
Okay, one more last question right here, Rob Bullard.
I'm curious how your students and your colleagues respond to your teaching.
I can answer that. If you can actually go and look up numbers. And what's amazing, when I first started teaching at this university years ago, I'd have all the conservatives taking my class. Now everybody takes it. I get the liberals taking it because they've never heard this before. They've never heard it before. and it's new. I guess the thing is, I don't know. Maybe I'm the. People are always afraid that their kids will go off to a university and follow some radical professor and stuff. I guess I'm the reverse of that. I guess I'm the person corrupting the liberals. I guess I don't know. But it's like, it's like, oh man, they've gone and rebelled against what we've taught you. Okay, but yeah, again, this is new to them. I want to stress this. There is something a point I want to make, something that I don't like in the media, and this is actually on the Fox media. This is actually Republican media. Something I don't like about it. We keep attacking the millennials, saying, oh, look how bad they are, look how bad they are, look how bad they are, oh goodness, oh goodness. Let me tell you, what's bad is 50, 60, and 70-year-olds. The millennials don't know any better, a lot of them. They're not bad. Do this. We'll say, what about Antifa? What about Antifa? Go back and look at those stories where the Antifa people get arrested. Go back and look at the mug shots and notice how many of them are in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s. And how few are young. Go back and look. Go back and look. If this is all they've been told, I have this policy. I've taught at 6 universities, 3 different states. I've had classes at other ones that have 320 people in class. So I've had, my guess is 20,000 or more students. I could count on one hand the number I just couldn't stand. I have a policy, by the way, you should never hate, but I'm mortal and I do. But I do have a policy, I try to make it a policy never to hate anybody under 40. Now after that, there's no fixing them. You're not going to fix me. That's why we always have annual reports. What do you do this time? I'm thinking, stop asking me. I'm not going to get any better. This is it. This is me now. But that's something, really take the time to educate them. They're not worse. I will say this, and studies show this. Do you know people in their 20s right now are less promiscuous than almost any generation of 20-year-olds ever? They're not all that. I'll give you one. This is an off tape. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to break. This isn't a bad thing, but I don't want to break somebody's trust.
We can always edit just.
We edit this one because I don't want to break somebody's trust. Let me give an example.
Why don't you turn it off just during this
debates and all that, and the one that I usually teach with is very liberal. We get along just fine because there are certain points we can note that this is a problem in society. Now, when you start dealing with Marxists, that's a little bit different. Okay, there are certain people that are problematic, but it's not all. There are very many liberals who may disagree with me. Sometimes they come around to agreeing with me. And stuff. So it's not as negative as you would think. By the way, I will mention this, and I want to mention this on there too. But if you're actually looking, I brought this up before. It would surprise you which universities in this state are the most dogmatic, the worst place for a conservative to go. All institutions of higher ed have a liberal leaning. There's no doubt about that. But there are some that go way beyond liberals. And I don't want to say too much. Is that
okay? Why don't we try to close? Let's give a big hand.
Thank you.
That was just outstanding, Kevin, and I appreciate it. Next week we're going to have Dr. Everett Piper, and some of you may or may not be aware, but the Wesleyan University on the West Coast, Azusa Pacific, has decided that gay, lesbian stuff is too complicated for them to think about or make rules. I'm not sure all of what they've done, but they've had 2 members of their board of directors resign because of the abominations going on at Azusa Pacific. A university that maybe 5-10 years ago you would have thought was impenetrable by the forces of evil. So Dr. Piper will be speaking on that. And other things going on in our educational institutions nationwide, so you'll want to bring your friends for that one. And Rick, did you have?
Well, just real quick, has everybody heard the latest news about OU, the Bourne versus the new president?
No.
It's a pretty big story. Big story.
Okay, let's shut this down, and then we'll keep the mic on and let you say something about that.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
And so next week, also, if you're not a member of OCPAC, if you haven't renewed for the year of 2019, I don't think Jesus will come before then. So you probably should go ahead and renew that membership. And Susan can take care of you right here. She has the forms, and we have books for sale. And Charlie's not here to auction anything because he's laying his slab for his house today. So that's why we don't see Charlie. So Mike, would you come up and close us in a word of prayer?
Preach us into heaven.
Okay. Self-government. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So there has to be a law outside of ourselves, right? It has to be written in our hearts, inside of ourselves. Anyway, let's pray. Father, we do thank you for this day. We thank you, Father, for this time of reminding us, Lord, what the foundations of government should be, how we should be governed, and Lord, how we should govern ourselves. And I would ask, Lord, for repentance for your people in this country that we live in today. The reason that we are in the mess that we're in is us. And I would just ask, Lord, that you would lead us to repentance and, Lord, bring us to the place where we would be self-governing people. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, before you go,